was a dreary night of November that I beheld the accomplishment of my toils. With an anxiety that almost amounted to agony, I collected the instruments of life around me, that I might infuse a spark of being into the lifeless thing that lay at my feet. It was already 1 in the morning. The rain pattered dismally against the panes, and my candle nearly burnt out when, by the glimmer of the half-extinguished light, I saw the dull yellow eye of the creature open. It breathed hard, and a convulsive motion agitated its limbs. How can I describe my emotions at this catastrophe, or how delineate the wretch whom, with such infinite pains and care, I had endeavoured to form? His limbs were in proportion, and I had selected his features as beautiful. Beautiful! Great God! His yellow skin scarcely covered the work of muscles and arteries beneath. His hair was of a lustrous black and flowing, his teeth of pearly whiteness, but these luxuriances only formed a more horrid contrast with his watery eyes, that seemed almost of the same colour as the dun-white sockets in which they were set, his shrivelled complexion and straight black lips. The different accidents of life are not so changeable as the feelings of human nature. I had worked hard for nearly 2 years for the sole purpose of infusing life into an inanimate body. For this I had deprived myself of rest and health. I had desired it with an ardour that far exceeded moderation. But now that I had finished, the beauty of the dream vanished, and breathless horror and disgust filled my heart. Unable to endure the aspect of the being I had created, I rushed out of the room and continued a long time traversing my bedchamber, unable to compose my mind to sleep. Victor Frankenstein, realizing the horror of what he's created, how he dreamed of creating something beautiful, but it turned out to be horrific. Having read that bit, I now want to reread this again. I'm sure I'll get round to it at some point. Let's see what else we have. Now, in complete contrast to that classic horror novel, I have Mr. Men books. I'm such a child. But these are more recent, modern versions, and these just appeal to me so much because look at the titles. You've got Mr. Tickle and the Dragon, Little Miss Stubborn and the Unicorn, Little Miss Sunshine and the Wicked Witch, and Mr. Happy and the Wizard. Miss Trouble and the Mermaid, Little Miss Splendid and the Princess, and Little Miss Lucky and the Naughty Pixies. Is that it? What else is there? There's also Mr. Strong and the Ogre. Is that it? That's all the ones they're offering me. I do love dragons, so I think we'll try reading this one. I'll try and hold it up and show you the pictures as well. Mr. Tickle was having a very good day. 21 people well and truly tickled. A very good day indeed. But when he arrived home, he could not believe his eyes. "I can't believe my eyes," he said to himself. "Somebody has burnt down my house." Mr. Tickle's house was gone. All that was left was a smoking, charred pile at the end of his garden path. There was more smoke rising from the end of the lane. Mr. Tickle set off to investigate. The smoke was coming from Mr. Funny's shoe car. Or rather, it had been his car, but all that remained was a burnt shoelace. Mr. Tickle could see another spiral of smoke in the distance. This time it was Mr. Clever's house, and very nearly Mr. Clever by the look of him. There he is, all charred. "I just got out in time," said Mr. Clever. "There can only be one culprit. It must have been a—" But Mr. Tickle did not wait to hear what it must have been. He had spotted the signs of another fire and was determined to follow the trail. It was a long trail which led from Mr. Chatterbox's burnt-out phone box to Farmer Field's burnt-down barn, and on through wilder, bleaker land up into the mountains. Soon it began to get dark, but Mr. Tickle continued to climb higher and higher. Darkness had fallen when he saw a bright light. In the distance there was a cave emitting a red glow. Suddenly, Mr. Tickle did not feel very brave. Suddenly he wished he had stayed to hear what Mr. Clever had said. Mr. Tickle decided to wait there until the morning. He curled up under a bush and wrapped his arms around himself 3 times to keep warm. Mr. Tickle fell into a surprisingly deep sleep, and the sun was up when he was woken by the rustling of the bush. Mr. Tickle opened an eye. The bush rustled again. "I know you're in there," rumbled a very deep voice. "Come on, show yourself." Ah, there's the dragon. Mr. Tickle cautiously poked his head through the top of the bush and stood blinking in the bright sunlight. He was quite unprepared for the sight that had met his eyes. He was standing face to face with a dragon. A huge dragon at that. A huge dragon with smoke curling from his nostrils. Mr. Tickle gulped. "Hello," said Mr. Tickle in a tiny voice. "I'm going to give you 30 seconds to give me a good reason why I shouldn't burn you to a crisp," bellowed the dragon. "And then I'm going to burn you to a crisp." Mr. Tickle gulped for the second time. Big, ferocious dragon. Mr. Tickle needed to think fast. He realized his arms were hidden. Quick as a flash, he sent one of his extraordinarily long arms snaking through the bushes and under the dragon's belly. Mr. Tickle flexed his fingers and hoped beyond everything that dragons are ticklish. The dragon instantly crumbled into a giggling, laughing tangle on the ground. "Ha ha ha," roared the dragon. "Hee hee hee," wheezed the dragon. "Ho ho ho," boomed the dragon. Stop it," he cried. "I'll stop tickling if you promise to stop burning things," said Mr. Tickle. "Anything, I'll promise anything," pleaded the dragon. Dragons are clearly very ticklish. Mr. Tickle stopped tickling and looked the dragon squarely in the eye. "What you need to learn," said Mr. Tickle, "is to put your fire breathing to good use. You should be using your extraordinary skills to make people happy. I'll show you." The dragon lay down on the ground and Mr. Tickle hopped on his back. Then the dragon shook out his great wings and took off, circling high over the mountains and swooping down into the distant valleys. They flew lower and lower, passing over barns and cottages. "Look," cried Mr. Tickle, "it's little Miss Splendid's house. I have an idea for your first good deed." He is flying on his back. Mr. Tickle and the dragon stood beside little Miss Splendid's swimming pool. "It is too cold today to swim in little Miss Splendid's pool," said Mr. Tickle. "Do you think you could do anything about that?" The dragon thought for a moment. Then he took a deep breath and breathed out through his nostrils. Flames licked across the surface of the swimming pool. In no time at all, the pool was steaming. Little Miss Splendid was delighted. Mr. Tickle, the dragon, and little Miss Splendid had a very enjoyable swim. In fact, the dragon had a very enjoyable day. He melted the ice on Mr. Bump's path, and Mr. Bump couldn't have been happier, as most mornings he usually slipped up and bumped his head. He warmed up Mr. Forgetful's cup of tea, which he had made at breakfast time and forgotten to drink. Mr. Forgetful was delighted. He doesn't normally get to drink hot tea. And Mr. Greedy was very impressed when the dragon cooked 15 sausages all at once. By the end of the day, the dragon had a big glowing smile across his face. "Do you know what?" he boomed cheerfully. "I feel really good." Mr. Tickle grinned and then the note aloud. If your daughter should die, or worse, succumb to the strange plague, it would be a comfort to know that it was all in pursuit of Mr. Bingley and under your orders. Oh, I am not afraid of her dying. People do not die of cuts and bruises. She will be taken good care of. Elizabeth, feeling really anxious, was determined to go to her. Though the carriage was not to be had, and as she was no horsewoman, walking was her only alternative. She declared her resolution. "How can you be so silly," cried her mother, "as to think of such a thing, with so many of them about, and in all this dirt? You will not be fit to be seen when you get there, assuming you make it alive. You forget that I am a student of Peiliu, of Shaolin, mother. Besides, for every unmentionable one meets upon the road, one meets 3 soldiers. I shall be back by dinner." "We will go as far as Meryton with you," said Catherine and Lydia. Elizabeth accepted their company, and they set off together, armed only with their ankle daggers. Muskets and katana swords were a more effective means of protecting oneself, but they were considered unladylike, and having no saddle in which to conceal them, the 3 sisters yielded to modesty. "If we make haste," said Lydia, as they walked cautiously along, "perhaps we may see something of Captain Carter before he goes." In Meryton they parted. The 2 youngest repaired to their lodgings of one of the officers' wives, and Elizabeth continued her walk alone, crossing field after field at a quick pace, jumping over stiles and springing over puddles. During this impatient activity, a bootlace came undone. Not wanting to appear unkept upon her arrival at Netherfield, she knelt down to tie it. There was suddenly a terrible shriek, not unlike that which hogs make while being butchered. Elizabeth knew at once what it was, and reached for her ankle dagger most expeditiously. She turned, blade at the ready, and was met with the regrettable visage of 3 unmentionables, their arms outstretched and mouths agape. The closest seemed freshly dead, his burial suit not yet discoloured and his eyes not yet dust. He lumbered toward Elizabeth at an impressive pace, and when he was but an arm's length from her, she plunged the dagger into his chest and pulled it skyward. The blade continued upward, cutting through his neck and face until it burst through the very top of his skull. He fell to the ground and was still. The second unmentionable was a lady, and much longer dead than her companion. She rushed at Elizabeth, her clawed fingers swaying clumsily about. Elizabeth lifted her skirt, disregarding modesty, and delivered a swift kick to the creature's head, which exploded in a cloud of brittle skin and bone. She too fell and was no more. And what's great about this is they've actually got a picture depicting that very scene. I just think that's great. The third was unusually tall, and though long dead, still possessed a great deal of strength and quickness. Elizabeth had not yet recovered from her kick when the creature seized her arm and forced the dagger from it. She pulled free before he could get his teeth on her, and took the crane position, which she thought appropriate for an opponent of such height. The creature advanced, and Elizabeth landed a devastating chop across its thighs. The limbs broke off, and the unmentionable fell to the ground helpless. She retrieved her dagger and beheaded the last of her opponents, lifting its head by the hair and letting her battle cry be known for a mile in every direction. There you go. Badass Elizabeth Bennet. Respect